Hello, and welcome back to the Gluten Free RN podcast. I'm Nadine, the Gluten Free RN. Today, during episode 57, we're going to keep it real here at the Gluten Free RN podcast. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on with me and my health. Stay tuned. Hi, and welcome back to the Gluten Free RN podcast. I'm Nadine, RN, BSN, CEN, Certified Emergency Room Nurse, even though I have not practiced nursing in the emergency department setting for almost 10 years now. But life goes on, and I am now approaching the 11th year of the Gluten Free RN. And very proud of that fact. A little surprised it's been 11 years already, but here we are. And now for the last year, I've been doing this podcast that people have the opportunity to hear all over the world. And of course, I get to speak about my favorite topic, celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, I guess my topics, microbiome, fecal microbial transplants, all of it and more. I hope you've enjoyed this journey that we've all been taking over the last 56 episodes. Sometimes we get real sciencey, sometimes we get real medical, and today we're going to get a little personal because we all know that physiologically, basically, we all need the same things. But due to factors and variables, we have some very different needs. This is why everyone's plan for health needs to be individualized and reassessed as time goes on. So I will refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs because that's really useful. That's a useful tool. At the very base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are our physiological needs and our safety needs. So food, water, warmth, and rest or sleep, which of course we all know that should have its own layer, insecurity and safety or shelter. And then once we have those, we can begin to look for our intimate friends and relationships, or sometimes those are intertwined with our very basic physiological needs. Our parents provide that belongingness and our needs for love and acceptance and emotional safety. And on top of those are esteem needs and self-actualization, achieving our full potential, which not all of us will be able to do in this particular lifetime, but we can all strive for it. What we do know based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that if we don't feel well or if our health isn't 100%, it is very difficult for us to achieve those higher levels of the Maslow's pyramid of self-actualization and esteem needs. And there are those of you out there that think that those of us that talk about celiac disease and autoimmune diseases and educate other people, that we have all of this together. Like we know everything. And sometimes the more I know, the more I realize I don't know a lot. So I'm always learning, just like everyone else, I hope, is always learning. There are people that I run into or that I see for consultation that think that their health will be optimized just by being on a gluten-free diet once they've been diagnosed with celiac disease. And most of us know at this point that there are many layers to this health onion that we're all living with. So a gluten-free diet might work for a period of time, but it typically is just the first layer. It is not the end-all and be-all for our health. It's why a certain percentage of people just don't heal on a gluten-free diet alone. And as we truly begin to understand those deeper layers, we understand that it will take years for some of us to heal and heal completely, so that we can work on that self-actualization that Maslow would like us to work on. And congratulations to those of you that are wrapping up your January Whole 30. And if you don't know what Whole 30 is, it's basically a paleo diet where you're taking out all forms of sugar, alcohol, getting rid of the things that will cause inflammation, and preparing your food so that you can get in touch with what real food is. So you're not eating anything processed during this 30 days of healing and restoring health. I myself have done a Whole30 a couple of times, and we took this January off from doing the exact regime of a Whole30. However, we're doing our variation of a Whole30 because it is helpful to reevaluate and to reassess where we're at with our health. For those of you that know me personally, you will understand that for the last 2.5 years, ever since I got hit with gluten 3 times in a row, I have been struggling with some health issues. Now, prior to this, I knew that if I got hit with gluten, my symptoms would last for about 10 weeks or for 2.5 months, actually. And at that point, my symptoms would typically resolve. Now, that's after 10 weeks. So I would go through this whole medical sequelae of symptoms, which included abdominal distension, neuropathies of my hands and feet, and it changed depending on, the seasons or how the wind was blowing, which symptoms would show up with that gluten hit. And sometimes I would get outbursts of DH or dermatitis herpetiformis. But when I did get hit with gluten 3 times, about 2.5 years ago, my symptoms continued. Interestingly enough, Pete noticed that my first symptom was that I got super cold. My body was shivering, and this was before I even knew that I got a gluten hit. He said, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? You're never this cold." Now, prior to being on a gluten-free diet, I had been cold all the time. And as I've mentioned before, I thought it was because I was from Buffalo, New York. And we all know that that is the epicenter of cold in the United States and a lot of snow. So I grew up there, and I just assumed that my hands were purple and my circulation was poor because it was cold there all the time. However, I did have Raynaud's, which is an autoimmune issue. So I was not unfamiliar with this feeling of being cold. However, I had not had this sensation for many years since I'd gone gluten-free. And this was during a September day on Mount Hood, and it was beautiful and not at all cold. Ideally, I should have been out in shorts and a tank top, running up and down the mountains and hiking without feeling cold. But here I found myself in the bed, underneath the blankets, and shivering. So that was my first clue that something was not perfect physiologically with me. And then over the next couple days, we found out that, yes, in fact, I had gotten hit with gluten 3 times, and my health started to respond to those gluten hits over this period of time. So I had abdominal distension, abdominal pain, my skin started to break out. There was a whole slew of symptoms that started. And at this point, I just said, okay, 2.5 months of symptoms, and then this will be over. Well, here we are 2.5 years later, and my symptoms still are not over. Interestingly enough, shortly after that 3rd hit of gluten, and trust me, all of these were not by my choice. I did not cheat. I would never cheat. These were all hits of gluten that were maybe not intentional where I was eating, but my food was assured to be gluten-free, and it wasn't. So I had trusted other people to make my food, and as we all know, that can at some times be Russian roulette. We have to take that risk sometimes if we are going to be eating out or having other people cook food for us, even if they're professional chefs. So after that 3rd shift, I actually ended up with pulmonary edema. For those of you that aren't nurses or doctors or healthcare providers, pulmonary edema means that my lungs actually filled up with fluid. It wasn't a pneumonia, so I had to sleep in a recliner chair for 10 nights. And by sleep, I mean not really sleep, but I had to sit up in order to breathe. So I'm an ER nurse, and I understand what that means. And that also, I took some risks with that. I don't encourage people to do that, but as an ER nurse, I get to make those decisions for myself, but you and your family members would probably make a different choice for your health. So I lived through those 10 days of sleeping or sitting up in a recliner, but my symptoms never really went away, including the pulmonary edema. I ended up with an inhaler for asthma, especially useful when I was out hiking or I laughed too hard. I would get thrown into these really random asthma attacks. So I did have an inhaler and have had one for about 2.5 years now. And I tried desperately to find out what was going on with me because nothing really made sense. So my sinuses got congested again. My lungs were struggling. I had occasional worsening of my DH on my right leg, which has never really gone away. So on my right lower leg, pre-tibial, I have a rash. And that rash is dermatitis herpetiformis, as evidenced by the fact that it matched all of my other patches of DH on my body, but it never did go away. Additionally, my edema got worse, and I put on that extra 20 pounds, which was not making me happy, and I could not make it go away, despite doing a 4-day water fast and an elemental diet, doing the whole 30, nothing would really make that weight go away. So I, as a nurse and as the Gluten Free RN, was once again in the depths of trying to figure out what the cause of all these really weird and disparate symptoms was. Because I really don't like to treat individual symptoms anymore and expect everything to get better. One of the compelling factors in this whole odyssey for the last 2.5 years was going to Chiang Mai, Thailand, after the International Celiac Disease Symposium and seeing a practitioner at a clinic, a woman who practiced Chinese medicine and acupuncture. I saw her, explained what was going on. She took my pulses. She was very quiet. She looked at my leg and my rash and proceeded to give me an acupuncture treatment and cupping, and then gave me a really sweet little cup of lotion, which she referred to as damp rash lotion. Now, by little, I mean really little. It was tiny, and I was to put this lotion on my leg twice a day. So I did it, not expecting any results, but really by the time I got home, all of my symptoms were gone. My sinuses were clear, my lungs were clear, and the rash, strictly from this damp rash lotion, was beginning to completely clear up. I was amazed. But here I was home, back in the United States, and I didn't really have access to this woman anymore, this practitioner that had cured me. Thankfully, I have really wonderful friends, and one of them has a son that lives in Chiang Mai. So he was able to get 10 more little containers of this damp rash lotion for me and send it to his mom in Oregon. So now I have a good supply of the damp rash lotion, which once again is clearing up this rash on my leg. But about the same time this damp rash lotion was coming to me from Thailand, I also went to see one of my friends who happens to be a naturopath. And she wanted to see the rash on my leg because she had a patient that also had rashes, and she wanted to see if it looked similar. And as she was looking at the rash on my leg and assessing it herself, she said, "How long have you had myxedema?" And I looked at her and I looked at my rash and I looked back at her and I said, "Myxedema?" I said, "Isn't that a coma? Shouldn't I be in a coma if I have myxedema?" Because that's my reference point for what myxedema is. There's a myxedema coma. And from nursing school, that's all I remembered. So I thought about it and I researched it. And lo and behold, I in fact have myxedema and hypothyroidism. And this is 11 years after I thought my Graves' disease was completely gone. My ANA was negative. I thought I was done with thyroid issues. But the reality is those gluten hits threw me right back in to a thyroid disorder. And trust me, I had actually visited many doctors, many practitioners over this 2.5-year period looking for the cause, and not one of them had picked it up when this particular naturopath put 2 and 2 together and recognized that I in fact had myxedema. So now I have the answer. Now I have the underlying cause of my sinus congestion, my 20 pounds that won't go away. It's actually 18, but I can't wait till it does go away. My pulmonary edema, and also the fact that my sodium was somewhat low. It was on the low end of normal, which didn't make much sense, but it completely fits into the picture of myxedema. And myxedema is spelled Myxedema. You can look it up. And from this, I plan on doing an entire episode on the thyroid disorders that plague people with celiac disease, including myself. From day one, every time I've given a lecture at any point, and typically regarding any topic, I will tell people that the thyroid gland has a bullseye on it for the gluten and gliadin proteins, and it will be destroyed or damaged from those proteins. And sometimes it's the only sign or symptom that people have an issue with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And even more typically, the thyroid is damaged along with many other organs in the body. Hormonally, many people have issues that can be attributed to damage to the thyroid gland or somewhere in their hormonal system or their endocrine system. The good news is I am now taking T3 and on the way to, once again, reclaiming my health. My edema is clearing up. I am losing some of that water weight, the edema component of mixed edema. My lungs are improving every day. This is an up and down healing process, just like everything else. So some days are better than others. But I am extremely hopeful that this T3 and the somewhat serendipitous, once again, diagnosis of my thyroid disorder will allow me to reclaim my status as superwoman once again. Because I did realize that over this period of time, this 2.5 years, I have been operating at about 60% of my normal. I want to be extremely active and do physically challenging things, but I found that this was hampering all of my attempts at being superwoman. So while I was able to function on a day-to-day basis without much difficulty, this did interrupt my sleep and prevented me from actually accomplishing some of the things that I had set out to do over this 2.5-year period of time. So I am now back on track, and I'm very excited about that. For those of you that have yet to read my book Donation, you may find that it is a good start, a very good first read if you've been diagnosed with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or if you really just want to find out a little bit more about the history, politics, signs or symptoms, and how to get started on a gluten-free diet. It's my story, surrounded by many other people's stories, my friends and my family that didn't know that they had issues with gluten. They didn't know that they had celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But once they stopped eating gluten, their health improved. So as a nurse, of course, that is my primary goal in life, is to make sure that I have a positive impact on people's health, and I'm a healthcare advocate. Count me in for being your advocate. I have to be my own healthcare advocate at times, and I want you to feel supported in whatever choices you make as you strive to get your health back. It's very important that we have those intimate friends and relationships, people that can support us when maybe we're not feeling our best, maybe when we're struggling with our health and we need that extra support. Thankfully, I have that in my life. I am really, really lucky. I have a beautiful home. I have excellent food. We have clean water. I like to get as much sleep as possible. I like to call it bed nesting when I go to bed. I have a super good bed with lots of pillows, and it's very cozy and comfy. And I like to bed nest at about 9 p.m. every night and then get a good 7, 8, 9, sometimes even 10 hours of sleep. So I'm well on my way to reclaiming my health that has been sidelined for the last 2.5 years. These are all lessons that I learn that I can then research and bring more information to you, the listeners of the Gluten Free RN podcast. This has prompted me to want to learn as much as I can about the thyroid after thinking that I, in fact, knew quite a bit about the thyroid. Well, time to go back to do more research. And if I have to go back to do more research, well, then we all do. There's always more to learn. There's always more to incorporate into our healthcare regime. So keep learning right along with me, the Gluten Free RN. At this point, I'd like to thank Tim Hallowell and the podcasting group for producing and editing the Gluten Free RN podcast every week and getting it out on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Player, wherever you listen to podcasts. And also thank you to the Pulse Media Network of nurse podcasters, along with RN FM Radio, the Innovative Nurse Show, Elizabeth Scalia's Your Next Shift podcast, and the Nurse Keith Show on iTunes. A huge shout out to Keith Carlson, Kevin Ross, and Elizabeth Scalia, my mentors for the Gluten Free RN podcast, and they're such a great inspiration as nurses. Thanks for keeping it real with me, Nadine Gruskowiak, the Gluten Free RN. So sometimes I have to step back and talk about what I've been struggling with so that you understand that maybe your symptoms, while you're treating the symptoms, there may be an underlying cause that you're missing. This is a reminder to work with healthcare providers that can help you get to be healthier and happier. Always be listening and try to take into account that if someone is suggesting that you may have an issue with your health, they may in fact know what they're talking about. So I like when people suggest to me that based on what they see or what they are sensing, that there is a potential easy fix. For me, it's taking T3. And I am very excited to see where this ends up and how my health is impacted simply by correcting my thyroid dysfunction. This has been episode 57 of the Gluten Free RN. Thank you for keeping it real with me today, Nadine Gruskowiak, the Gluten Free RN. If you have any questions, please look back to the podcasting notes. There are great reference on every episode of the Gluten Free RN. And don't forget to tell people to listen to the Gluten Free RN podcast. Share it. Other people are very hungry for this information, no matter where they live in the world. So help them find this podcast, the Gluten Free RN. Thanks again for listening, and until next episode, keep it real, eat well, and be healthy. Bye.